The desert sky is still navy when the first line of rows pushes against the horizon. And in that hush before dawn, a rider urges his camel across the ridged sand. The air is cold enough to bite, but his heart is warmer than the coming sun, for his journey is not a merchant's routine crossing. It is a march of purpose, a stride of loyalty. And the rider is Abu Bakr, one whose footsteps would echo across centuries. If you close your eyes, you can feel the saddle creak, smell the faint sweetness of burning myrrh from a distant campfire, and sense the quiet determination of a man whose calm courage will cradle a newborn faith until it can walk on its own. That soft blue moment when night and morning meet is where our story opens. And it does so with the promise that sometimes the gentlest souls change the world in the biggest ways. Abu Bakr was born in 573 CE, 40 years before the first revelation would descend on Muhammad. His lineage flowed through the noble clan of Banu Taym, a branch of Quraysh known more for honesty than for power politics. His father, Abu Kuhafa, traded cloth. His mother, al-Khair Salma, was a woman of dignity whose hands were never too proud to share bread with neighbors. They named their son Abdullah, yet nicknames quickly took root in Arabian culture. And he grew up called Abu Bakr, the father of the young camel, a title earned because he loved to raise sleek, fast calves and always set them free once grown. Even as a child, he disliked the sight of chained creatures. Where others saw livestock value, he saw living beings deserving kindness. In the alleys of Mecca, he stood apart. Softer voice, quicker smile, and a habit of balancing trade scales so precisely that customers trusted him without counting. Teenage years carried him north on caravan routes toward Busra in Syria. Sunlit plains taught him barter. Starry nights taught him wonder. In bustling markets, he learned languages, picked up tales of ancient prophets, and quietly reflected on why so many nations bowed to idols carved by their own hands. He never swore allegiance to stone gods, and when friends teased him, he would simply say, "A Lord who cannot hear me cannot help me." That gentle resistance was his quiet rebellion, and it foreshadowed a future where his truthful tongue would defend revelation with the firmness of a seasoned sword. Friendship shaped destiny on a simple afternoon when Abu Bakr sat beside Muhammad, his childhood companion, under a cluster of date palms. Muhammad's eyes carried a new depth, as though he had witnessed a horizon beyond sight. He told of an angel, of verses that stirred the soul, of a single God who asked for hearts instead of statues. Abu Bakr did not analyze prophets or popularity. He listened with his spirit and replied, "I believe every word." No thunder cracked overhead, yet that sentence shook the unseen world, for it signaled the first unconditional adult male acceptance of Islam. In one breath, the fledgling message gained its strongest pillar. Mecca soon became a furnace for believers. Powerful clans feared losing control, and torture followed belief. Abu Bakr's wealth, ample yet never flaunted, turned into a lifeline. He purchased the freedom of Bilal ibn Rabah, whose mighty voice would one day call prayer from minarets. He bought Amir ibn Fuhaira, who later guided the Hijra path. He freed Lubaina, Nadia, Haritha, and a chain of slaves whose names might have drowned in history had Abu Bakr not exchanged their shackles for dignity. Each transaction depleted his own coffers, but coin after coin sounded like a drumbeat of justice. One afternoon, when Abu Bakr counted the silver left in his money pouch, his father worried aloud, "You spend on men you hardly know." Abu Bakr smiled, eyes soft but firm, and answered, I buy their freedom for the sake of God." In that response lay the DNA of Islamic charity. His generosity, however, did not shield him from harm. Quraysh thugs caught him near the Kaaba, striking him with fists and sandals until his skin split and his nose bled onto marble tiles. Friends carried him home unconscious. Hours later, his swollen lids fluttered open, and before he asked for water or medicine, he whispered, "Is Muhammad safe?" That question painted the core of his loyalty. Pain to his body meant nothing if the Prophet remained unhurt. Years eased forward, yet trials grew harsher. When Muhammad described his miraculous night journey to Jerusalem in heaven, skeptics mocked. Who will believe such fantasy? Abu Bakr replied without pause, "I believe him in things even stranger. Daily messages from the Lord of the worlds. So why not believe this?" From that day, he was called As-Siddiq, the upright in truth, and the nickname overshadowed his lineage in honor. Persecution pushed believers to migrate first to Abyssinia, and then to Yathrib, later Medina. Abu Bakr yearned to leave Mecca's hostility, but the Prophet told him, "Wait. Maybe God will grant me a companion on the journey." Abu Bakr preserved 2 swift camels, feeding them special fodder so their muscles tightened for long distance. He also prepared travel provisions sewn into leather pockets by his daughter Asma, who hid the sewing needle in her hair to evade spies. When revelation finally gave permission, the night skies over Mecca were thick with conspiracy. Assassins surrounded Muhammad's house. In hushed urgency, the Prophet arrived at Abu Bakr's door. Tears sprang to Abu Bakr's eyes, not out of fear, but out of joy. He would be the chosen companion. They slipped through back streets to the southern hills, opposite their eventual northern path, using strategy to fool pursuers. 3 nights in the cave of Thar now stand legendary in oral lore. The spider spinning its web across the entrance, the pigeon nesting by untouched eggs, soldiers peering in yet turning away, convinced no one could be inside. Within that narrow space, Muhammad prayed while Abu Bakr scanned the entrance, heart racing only at the thought of harm to his friend. The Prophet reassured him. "What do you think of 2 when God is their third?" Those words, later sealed in Quran 9:40, solidified a theology of calm under pressure. When they finally trekked north, Abu Bakr's freed servant Amir ibn Fuhaira steered the camels, and young Abdullah, Abu Bakr's son, carried fresh intelligence nightly. Even the minutiae of their escape read like a thriller, but more gripping than suspense was the trust weaving the team together. Medina greeted them with drums and chanting, "The full moon has risen upon us." Houses flung doors wide, eager to host the Prophet, yet his camel settled at the plot of 2 orphan boys. Abu Bakr immediately purchased the land for a mosque, footing the cost in gold without bargaining. He himself erected mud bricks, lifting each with calloused hands. His wealth did not excuse him from labor. Rather, it added weight to his service. In these first months, he forged brotherhood with Kharija ibn Zayd, an Ansari of Medina, sharing each meal as if they had always been family. When battles came, Abu Bakr, now past 40, rode in the front so younger men could draw courage from his steadiness. At Badr, he faced his own son Abd al-Rahman, still a non-believer at the time, across the lines. Yet he held no malice, proving that principle rose above blood ties. Victory at Badr lifted spirits, but defeat at Uhud tested hearts. During the chaos, swords slashed and rumors spread that Muhammad had fallen. Some fighters fled. Abu Bakr, beside only a handful, shielded the Prophet's wounded body until the hilltop regrouping saved the day. Sweat streaked with dust on his face, yet he never cursed the deserters. His plea was always for their repentance instead. In the Battle of the Trench, Medina faced an alliance of tribes numbering 10,000. The city dug a wide ditch as defense, an unheard-of tactic in Arabia. Abu Bakr shoveled earth from dawn to dusk, skin blistering alongside laborers far younger. Through rain-soaked nights, he guarded the narrow passages where the ditch could be crossed, sword drawn, lips murmuring prayers. One stormy dawn, when enemies tried a surprise crossing, arrow shafts rattled against shields. Abu Bakr stood ground so firmly that a younger companion later swore the elder fought like a mountain unmoved by lightning. Time gave Medina breathing space, and after Hudaybiya's uneasy truce, the Prophet sent letters to emperors. Abu Bakr financed part of those diplomatic embassies, for he had the eye of a trader who understood the value of peaceful roads. He also guided the marriage of his daughter Aisha, whose quick intellect and sharp memory preserved so many hadiths that later scholars would call her a school in herself. When Mecca finally opened its gates without resistance, Abu Bakr's father Abu Kuhafa walked slowly, leaning on an arm, hair white as cotton. The Prophet suggested he stay home, but Abu Bakr wished his father to experience faith firsthand. The elder placed a trembling hand on his son's chest, feeling pride that the child he once worried about had become a pillar for the entire peninsula. Then came the farewell pilgrimage. 100,000 believers moving like a wave of white cloth across Arafat's plain. Abu Bakr rode behind the Prophet, tears never far from his eyes, sensing that the mission was nearing completion. Shortly after returning to Medina, the Prophet felt fever. When weakness prevented him from leading congregational prayer, he said, "Tell Abu Bakr to lead." Some companions hesitated, thinking his voice too gentle, but the Prophet insisted. For 17 prayers, Abu Bakr stood where Muhammad once stood, voice cracking as he recited, his chest heaving with emotion. The symbolism was clear to anyone thoughtful. Leadership after revelation would pass to the one whose heart beat most in tune with the messengers. The morning Muhammad died, Medina shook like an earthquake of sorrow. Umar threatened anyone who claimed the Prophet was gone, brandishing his sword in shock. Abu Bakr, who had gone to visit his wife's house on the city's edge, rode back at news of the illness's climax. He entered the chamber, lifted the cloak from his friend's face, and kissed his forehead, saying, "How blessed you are, alive and dead." Then he faced the crowd. Under the harsh sun, he recited, "Muhammad is but a messenger." Messengers passed before him. Grief turned into clarity. The Ummah exhaled as if lungs had forgotten air, then suddenly remembered. That same day, tribal leaders of Ansar gathered at the courtyard of Banu Saida discussing succession. Abu Bakr, Umar, and Abu Ubaidah hurried there. Voices rose, loyalties tangled, but Abu Bakr's calm reason prevailed. He said, "We are followers. You are supporters. Let us choose from the Quraysh whom people will accept." He proposed Umar or Abu Ubaidah. Yet Umar grasped Abu Bakr's hand and pledged allegiance first, recognizing the obvious choice. One by one, others followed, and unity, so fragile, held. Abu Bakr's first sermon as Caliph set a standard no palace manifesto could match. "The weak among you will be strong with me until I return their rights. The strong will be weak until I take what is due." He refused guards, walked streets alone, and kept his shop selling cloth so he wouldn't burden the treasury. When Umar and others insisted on a stipend, he accepted the bare minimum, equal to a laborer's wage. Even that he audited. Upon death, he instructed that any overpayment be refunded to Bait al-Mal. But idealism faced hard rebellion. News arrived that tribes across central and eastern Arabia refused to pay zakat. Some claimed prophethood like Musaylima in Yamama or Tulayha in Najd. Counselors urged postponement until grief subsided. Abu Bakr declared, "I will fight whoever separates prayer from zakat." For him, the social solidarity of almsgiving was not a tax. It was the spine of brotherhood. He assembled 11 contingents, appointing Khalid ibn al-Walid commander against Musaylima. Campaign letters preserved in chronicles began with peaceful offers, listed Quran verses, and ended with firm resolve. By year's end, Ridda wars restored allegiance, though at heavy cost, including hundreds of Quran memorizers. That loss birthed a monumental project. Umar worried that if more reciters died in battle, verses might vanish. Abu Bakr was initially reluctant. Compiling the Quran felt daring, but accepted the argument for preservation. He commissioned Zayd ibn Thabit, who gathered parchments, bones, leaves, and testimony of eyewitnesses. The result, a single volume, sat in Abu Bakr's house, guarded like a treasure more precious than empire. Every modern Quran traces its written lineage to that moment of foresight. With internal stability returning, the Caliph looked outward to relieve economic pressure on grain-strained Medina. Byzantine rule in Syria taxed Bedouin tribes harshly. Persian governors in Iraq extorted oases dwellers. Abu Bakr dispatched 2 armies, one under Khalid toward Iraq, another under Amr ibn al-As toward Palestine. Before departure, he walked among foot soldiers, checking sandals, reminding them to avoid harming civilians' crops or worship places and to honor promises. His rules of engagement would later serve as templates for Muslim military ethics. Despite victories abroad, Abu Bakr's life at home remained humble. One dusk, he passed a widow's door and heard children crying. He asked why. They said food was scarce. He returned with a pot of milk, kneeling to feed them until sleep calmed their tears. The woman did not know she spoke to the Caliph until neighbors told her. Shocked, she visited him next day to thank him. He replied, "Leaders are shepherds. What worth is a shepherd who ignores his flock?" Stories like these multiplied, told by travelers in Persia, recited by merchants in Yemen, marveling that a ruler of Arabia ground flour with his own hands for an elderly neighbor. His personal worship was equally intense. When he recited Quran at dawn, tears flowed freely. Once a Bedouin visiting the mosque heard him and said, "That man's heart is either full of grief or full of love." Companions answered, "Both. For love of God grieves at any distance from him." On the battlefield of Tabuk, where scorching heat forced men to shade their eyes, Abu Bakr donated every coin in his house for the army's supplies. The Prophet asked what he left for his family. He replied, "God and his messenger." The sincerity of that statement left even Umar in awe, admitting later he could never match Abu Bakr's generosity. His family carried that spirit. Aisha transmitted over 2,000 prophetic sayings. Asma earned the title Data Nitaqain, the woman with 2 belts, for tearing her waistband to tie food for the Hijra. Abdul Rahman, once on the opposing side at Badr, embraced Islam later and became a valiant warrior at Yarmouk. The household of Abu Bakr, though modest in furniture, overflowed with service. 3 summers after assuming office, fever struck the Caliph. Medina's scorching days exacerbated his weakness. He still led prayers whenever strength allowed, leaning on 2 men. One evening, he called Uthman to write a document naming Umar as successor, knowing his stern justice would balance communal needs. Some objected, but Abu Bakr said, "I fear people will argue after me, so I appoint for them the best I see." He asked Aisha to bury him beside the Prophet, in the chamber that once was her bedroom. He owned a young camel, a servant, and a well-worn garment. He instructed they be returned to the treasury. With a voice faint yet clear enough to be remembered, he advised, "Fear God, keep prayer. Treat the weak kindly, and remember that actions are judged by intentions." On a Monday, the 22nd of Jumada al-Thani, 13 AH, Abu Bakr exhaled his last. Umar led the funeral prayer, and crowds pressed so tightly around the small bier that dust rose like a haze. He was lowered into the adjacent grave, his head level with the Prophet's shoulder. The chamber, no larger than a modest cottage, now held the two greatest friends in Islamic memory. Later, a poet wrote, "If loyalty had bones, they lie side by side in Medina." Legacy is often measured in architecture, but Abu Bakr left no palace. Instead, his legacy is carved in the Quran's preservation, in the unity of the Arabian tribes, and in the leadership model where humility sits taller than throne backs. The Muslim calendar, which counts years from the hijrah he guarded, silently honors him each time a date is written. Every call to prayer echoes Bilal's voice, which was saved from chains by Abu Bakr's coins. Every copy of the Quran rests on his decision, and every leader who quotes, "Help me if I am right, correct me if I stray," stands in his shadow. Picture the desert after rainfall, rare, fragrant, and transforming the barren into a garden of brief blossoms. Abu Bakr's life was like that rain, short in rule, gentle in fall, yet bursting seeds that would become forests of civilization. When you walk into a mosque and see rows of strangers standing shoulder to shoulder, remember the first caliph who insisted that wealth should bridge differences rather than widen them. When you hear a story of compassion triumphing over cruelty, think of the man who freed slaves before freedom was fashionable. And when leadership anywhere feels heavy with arrogance, recall the cloth merchant who became the shepherd of a nation yet still patched his own garments. Dawn in the desert has advanced while we traveled long through memory, but the sun now climbs fully, casting sharp light on dunes that stretch beyond sight. Somewhere in that glare, you can almost see the silhouette of a rider fading into distance. Cloak snapping, resolve unbroken. The scene reminds us that history's greatest torchbearers quite often begin as ordinary souls, driven by extraordinary sincerity. Abu Bakr rode for truth, spoke for justice, and lived for service. His story does not close with a grand monument. It closes with a question we each must answer whenever the world asks who will stand up next. In the echoing silence after the narration ends, may his life inspire our footsteps, steady our voices, and shape our own dawns, wherever they rise, under whatever sky, for as long as the call to goodness continues to stir the human heart.